I just read this book, Psychology of Money, and I want to preface by saying that I understand nothing about money or stocks or any markets or anything like that. I do, however, enjoy psychology, and I wanted to see if there was still anything I could take away from this book. And though the book uses a lot of lingo and business terminology that completely went over my head, there were still a few key points that I found very interesting, especially as they relate to studying and productivity. And the first point the book makes that I completely agree with is that when you're looking for success in anything, like investing or school or work or anything that requires a lot of your effort, the majority of the payoff you get, the majority of the results you end up getting are often the results of a very small subsection of whatever work you're doing. So for example, if we apply this to studying, say you have a test to study for, and let's say you end up studying for about 10 hours. What this book suggests is that a very small proportion of the work you do, or in this case of the stocks that you invest in, are going to result in the majority of the money you make. Or if we translate this to studying, a very small subset of the information that you study is going to give you the most results on test day. And if you've heard of the Pareto distribution, this will sound very familiar to you. It's always a very small proportion of the effort that we put in that's leading to the majority of the results. So say I have a chemistry test coming up in 1 week. If I wanted to, I could study for dozens of hours on end just looking at every single thing that could possibly come up on the test. But it makes more sense to find a couple key topics that are going to be mostly involved on the test and sort of devote most of my energy towards these specific topics, as opposed to thinking about every possible thing I could put my effort into. And in the book, they talk about Warren Buffett, who's the richest investor ever. And they're essentially saying that throughout his career as an investor, he invested in maybe 500 different stocks, but it was about 10 that made him the majority of his money. And this is to say that the effort that you put in isn't always linear. There's more likely to be diminishing returns as you go over time. So a very small subset of what you can do is going to give you the majority of the results. So to the people who tend to set the actual time they spend studying as their goal as opposed to what material they're going to go over, this is sort of a wake-up call to show you that it's not really dependent on how much time you actually spend studying, but as opposed to this, it's more important that you're actually narrowing down the specific topics that are going to give you the biggest return on test day. And another important point that they make in this book is that people do not care as much about you as you think they do. And the first example this book brings up is buying a Ferrari. A lot of people will buy expensive cars like this thinking that when they drive down the street, people are going to give them much more respect and admiration. But more often than not, when people see a super expensive product like this and someone driving it, they more often pay attention to the actual product. So in this example, the Ferrari, as opposed to associating the person driving it with riches and being more respectable. They don't really care about the person in the car as much as the actual car itself. So if we translate this over to college and studying, a lot of people think that if they choose a really hard major or a difficult field with a lot of work, then people will give them more respect or that they'll be more valuable intrinsically somehow. But the takeaway that we can translate to college is that people really don't care as much as you think they do. No one is sitting up at night thinking about how much you have to study or how cool your major is or how much work you have. So it's a lot more beneficial for you to actually choose a major you enjoy and something that's going to be fulfilling, as opposed to choosing something because you think you're going to get validation from other people, because most likely you won't get as much as you think you will. And this is also relevant to the money that you'd actually get from jobs after college. So if you want to be a doctor because you know it makes a lot of money and you think that people will respect you more because you're making a lot of money, most likely this isn't going to happen. Say you have a nice car or a nice house, people will look at those things and they'll get really excited and project themselves into these purchases. So for example, they'll look at your Ferrari and imagine what it would be like if they were driving that Ferrari, but they're not going to associate you with these purchases. No one's really going to care that you specifically have them. It's not going to intrinsically increase your value. No one's really going to be interested in you specifically. The author Morgan Housel in this book notes that it's much easier to get respect from others through much simpler things, like just being kind or being more empathetic or interesting or humble, as opposed to having all these expensive assets. If you're looking for respect, doing it through money and through a career that you think is going to impress others is looking for it in the wrong place. And now the final point that I thought was really insightful was that when you're looking up to other people and you're looking at strategies that will maybe improve your life and the amount of money you make or the way you study, how productive you are, it's not very productive to look at extreme outliers when you're trying to find out how to improve your life. So a lot of people investing, they'll look at Warren Buffett and look at the strategies he used, and they figure that if they just follow his advice, then they'll become amazing investors and they'll have no problems in the future with investing. The thing is that as you get to these extreme endpoints of success or failure, the amount that luck or risk play into these outcomes increases exponentially. So if you look at someone like Warren Buffett, you have to acknowledge that a lot of the money they have and a lot of the results they got were purely out of luck, because like we said earlier, he had 500 plus investments, maybe 10 of them paid off big time. So you can't be looking at these extreme outliers as a way to live your own life. And it's very similar in college. You might have a friend who's super productive and getting all A's, but maybe they're pulling all-nighters every other day. And this just isn't sustainable. It's not productive. Maybe they're an extreme outlier and they're doing super well, but if you want to do well yourself, it doesn't make sense to look at these crazy outliers, because most likely what they're doing isn't going to be generalizable to you. Instead, it's more beneficial to look at people who are generally on the right track, people who are generally doing well for themselves, and look at these stats in greater numbers. So generally look at what people who are good at investing are doing, as opposed to looking at these extreme outliers. Similarly, if you look at people in your grade who are doing well in their classes, and you kind of look more generally, the general things they're doing, maybe they're getting better sleep, maybe they're using more active studying techniques to do better in their classes, looking at these specific examples as opposed to the extreme outliers is going to get you much more success in the long run. And now just to quickly review the 3 points we talked about. If you want to do well in investing and making more money, or in college, then there's 3 steps to start thinking about. First is that a very small proportion of the efforts you put in are going to lead to the majority of the results. So you shouldn't spend all your time doing tangential side tasks if there's a smaller subset of things you can do to get the majority of the results. Second, people don't care as much as you think about your success. Do things that are fulfilling and interesting to you. Study things that excite you as opposed to things that you think you'll get respect for, because most likely you won't get as much respect from this as you think you will. And third, stop looking at extreme outliers as a guide on how to live your life. Instead, look at the people who are generally doing well and try to emulate what they're doing. Now, I hope you can find some of these tips useful, especially if you're a college student, because I know sometimes it can be an absolute grind. If you stuck till the end, I really appreciate you watching until now. If you like videos like this on studying and productivity for college students, I really recommend you subscribe. There's going to be a whole lot more videos like this soon, but until then, I'll see you guys.